sit back and enjoy a short clip, and then EVON will come out and share his thoughts and insights about life and how we can move towards alignment with what nature can truly sustain.
Tēnā tei, hlago gwantri go ganio go gwandei. Jukwenda a dago gorate jats a go gwantri kwa ga hanaginchi. Gwent I go tridgra in hagunsi a dagorate. Nichin go wantri dai go gagwat at negra he da en jet ninjaranta.
My grandfather used to say that the things from your past cast a really tall shadow. He told me that I would see our young people taking their lives. He said, it's going to come right up to you and touch your hand. It's going to work right around you.
Every person deals with pain differently. We never want to lose family members. The suicide rates in Alaska are 6 times higher than the national average. My uncle committed suicide when I was a little girl, and he was a great guy, and then he was gone. He shot himself while he was intoxicated.
I wanted to hunt, I wanted to put food away, but I couldn't do it without vehicle and gas money. At that time, I thought the only answer was not to face it. So I started drinking my home brew, and it made me brave. That's when I turned the gun on myself and told everybody to stay back. The last thing I remember saying was, "By God, I love you all."
My youngest son was drinking. When his dad died, I sure had a tough time with him. Really hurt feeling like that when they go like that.
I don't want to get hurt, and I don't want nobody to go through that. Just the feeling of agony and pain.
Doluda, Aipani, Wakanini, Aipani.
A lot of our people have a vision of being able to reground ourselves in our culture, our traditional values, our way of life, but also be able to be successful in the world today.
What's important for me is that my kids and I aren't just surviving. Our people have been surviving for a while. I feel like what's important is that we're thriving.
Everybody knows everybody here, and if anybody's hurting, I'm always open to listen. I try to help people whenever they ask. That's what it takes.
I'm focused and concentrating on trying to help our people. It is my job, it is my inherited responsibility. Those that you can help, those that you can work with, you give 200%. To give anything less It's not euchenic, it's not traditional, it's not real. When I see those young people open their eyes, I know in my heart, at that moment, they got it. They value their life.
Shalaknai, Chukuvan Guare, Shojri Ivan Cho Peter Ojiva Shank Ogotsanitli, Nets Aguchanitli. Wow. I never know what I'm going to say when I get up on a stage, and it worries me sometimes. I sometimes wonder why they keep inviting me back out here. This is actually the first speech outside of my community I've accepted since 2007, because I wanted to focus my time on my people out in the communities, in the villages, and out on the land to see what was really possible if the focus and attention was kept there. And I didn't want to lose who I am and my path in life coming out here and just being on stages all the time. But I'm really happy that I accepted to come out here and be here with you today. I decided earlier this year that I'd spent enough time out on the land among my people with those who are suffering the most, and that it was time for me to come out again and share a few reflections. Before I begin, though, I have a few acknowledgments to make. First and most importantly, my mother is here with me, Adeline. If she's here, can she stand? The chief's vest I wear was made by my mother. I think it took, what, Mom, 4 years to make. I'll get to that point in my story later, because so much of my life has been tied to a path of healing and awakening and deepening my awareness, and there's so many pieces to that story. The real story would take only about 16 hours, but I have 15 minutes. I want to thank the Marian Institute for inviting me here. I have a few friends, Kalia, Joanna, and others that are involved in this program, and they were a part of why I accepted to come and speak as well. It always feels good to come to some place where you know somebody, but everyone here has been so welcoming to me, and I really appreciate that. I want to acknowledge a few of the leaders that came before me who have all now passed, but who had great influence in my life. One of them was Chief Peter John of the Minto people. He was a traditional chief of 43 Diné tribes from interior Alaska. He passed on in early 2000s at 102 years old. But when he was 99 years old, he was the one who placed the chief necklace around my neck. And since that time, I've taken that responsibility very seriously. Also, Chief David Salmon from Chalkitsik, who is Gwich'in from my own people, lived his first 18 years of life, not even in a village, but out on the land. I had the benefit of traveling with him as a young person, before I myself was moved into a position of leadership. And he used to have like 12 different types of arrowheads that our people used to use out on the land. Amazing ones, you know, big broad ones for hunting the ducks and the geese. He even had this one that was carved in a certain way that when you shoot it into the moose, the tip stays in there, but the arrow drops off. And the arrow, as the moose moves, the muscles pull the arrow into it to penetrate it, to take it down. But he grew up in a different era than I grew up, but it was an honor to be able to spend some time with him in my life. I also want to acknowledge my grandmother, my mother's mother, who really led the way for our family. She took on so much responsibility and demonstrated a hard work ethic and a commitment to support our people. She became one of the foremost linguists of our language for the University of Alaska, and was honored with several awards for books that she had written in Gwich'in on one side and English on the other. And finally, I want to acknowledge my wife, Ine. You know, really the work is our work, my family's work, my mother's work, my brothers, my sisters, because that's the way we roll. We roll as families and as tribes, as clans among our people, and that is what enables us to be strong and to keep doing the work that needs to be done in the world. And also my children, I want to thank them for understanding why their father has to be gone so much. I have 3 beautiful daughters, Nana Ej, Lil, and Anaba, and 1 handsome son who's now taller than me, Olav. And I want to thank them for understanding and supporting their father to be doing this work in the world. I wanted to begin with this film because I felt like it's one thing for me to tell the stories and shape the pictures in your mind of the place that I come from, but then I thought, well, it'll be another thing if I'm able to bring some of the faces and voices and scenery of the land that I come from here to you. And so that was why I wanted to begin with that film. It's also been the focus of my work for the last 4 years, is to help support a healing process among my people so that we could reduce the level of suicides that are occurring among our people. I might get to that later, but it started when I was a teenager at 13. They actually pulled me and all the other young Native men into a room when my mom brought me out of the village down to Fairbanks to get a better Western education. And I remember they told us, you guys are more likely to end up dead or in jail by the time you're 25 than finish high school. And the 11 or 12 of us young boys lived up to that. I wasn't one of the ones that finished high school. But I want to drop back earlier than that. First, I want to start in Arctic Village, the village that really shaped a lot of my thinking and my understanding about our place in the world as human beings. And I just want to do it through telling a story. You know, my village is very remote, a couple 100 miles out in the land, way up in the mountains. There's huge mountains. There's a big valley, and there's a river that flows through it. There's a small creek, Vashainko, that's what the village is named after. And our village sits right on a hill where that creek feeds into the river. And it was amazing to get to live there as a young person. I'll just tell you one story from that time. As the introducer said, you know, there was no electricity, no running water. Gwich'in was still the primary language spoken among the people. It was, I think National Geographic came up even when I was a little boy, and they made a film called The Last Indians on the Last Frontiers. And they had me in it when I was a little boy because I used to have a wood yoke, and I'd go down to the river and haul 5-gallon buckets of water up to my grandpa's cabin. And I remember they said, oh, we got to catch you hauling water. So I said, all right. And I filled up the tube, 5-gallon buckets of water. And, you know, as a 10-year-old boy, that's pretty heavy. And I lifted it up, and it's a pretty steep hill that goes up to the edge of the trail. And I hiked all the way up to the trail, and I got to the top, and I put him down for a second to take a break. And I was like, oh, all right, you know, and I was about to pick him up again and start going back to the cabin, and the guy with the video camera said, whoa, 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 whoa. Hey, we need you to do that again. And I said, what? I said, and that was my first time I realized how non-Native people think. And I was thinking, why would you do that after you put all that work into getting up to the top of the hill? And he said, well, we need to get that shot again. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? He said, dump out the water and go back down and refill it. And I said, I don't know. He said, well, it'll pay $10. I was like, all right. $10, you know, back in the early 80s was quite a bit, especially in the village. There's, you know, we have not too many jobs out there, so maybe that was my first job, I don't know. But it was a peaceful life out there. No jails, no cops, no laws, just the cultural values of our people that dictated how it was that we were to live on the land. We were able to be true individuals, yet still collective as a community. You know, the unique characteristics of our personality and the way we brought ourselves forward in the world was respected. We weren't trying to be molded to be this way or that way. We could just be who we are, and our people enjoyed that uniqueness in each one of us. And there was dog teams all around the village when I was growing up, and the story I want to tell you is we used to have this race for us young kids. I think it's a single dog race, and they had us start out in front of the whole community. We're only in our underwear, in a sleeping bag on the snow. It's probably about 10 below zero, and they shoot a rifle, and the 4 or 5 of us young boys in that age group jump out of our sleeping bags, jump up with, you know, just underwear on in front of the whole village, get dressed, roll up our sleeping bag, throw it in a dog sled, go up to a tree, pull the dogs off the tree, put their dog harnesses on them, hook them up the sled. We do a 2-mile loop and come back to where we started. But you don't win the race when you cross the finish line. You have to unharness your dogs, tie them up to the tree, roll out your sleeping bag, get undressed in front of everybody, and the first person back in their sleeping bag wins. I always had slow dogs, but I was good at getting undressed. Usually came in third, I think. Man, they gave me the 5-minute clock already, and I haven't even begun. So those are some of my earlier years anyways, getting to live in the village, getting to shape what it meant to be a person out there on the land. A lot of hunting, a lot of fishing. It's amazing to get to harvest your food from the land for most of your life, and I still do that today. I'll get back to that a little bit later though too. So fast forward, my mom brought me down to Fairbanks, get a better Western education, and I fell down the same path that so many of our other young Native men fall down. Ended up getting caught up in alcohol, drugs. I dropped out of high school, as I mentioned, and wasn't on too good of a path. And one day when I was out partying with my buddies, 16, I was already out of high school. I had kind of this breakdown moment. I was, you know, when you're in one of those deep cries where you're like, and you're doing that thing. And my cousin came up to me and she said, "What's going on? What are you crying? We're having a good time over here." And what came out of me was, I never had a father. And it was the beginning of this path that I'm on, actually, where I realized that somewhere in me was a deep pain in not ever having a father around growing up. And my mother raised us as a single mother and set a wonderful example for us that me and my brothers and sisters follow to this day, starting when we came back down towards Fairbanks, actually up in the village too. And that's all I really wanted, you know. I decided, you know what, when I become a father, I'm going to be a good father. I'm going to be there for my children. And that was really the choice that led me somehow to be on the stage in front of you today. But it led me to question, why are our people suffering? What has happened in the world before my time that brought civilization to this point? At the time, I was focused mostly on my own people, Alaska Native people, because we all lived in the low-income housing and the ghetto complexes and the urban areas in Alaska. And I noticed that all the non-Native people lived up in the hills in nice houses. I used to, the rich factor for me was always like, if they could afford a bag of Doritos, they are rich. I can laugh about that nowadays. But, so that began kind of this journey that I've been on ever since that time, and that was 19 years ago. So for the last 19 years, I've been on this healing journey that has brought me into positions of leadership among my own people. It's actually brought me all around the world. I've been blessed to be able to do some healing work in Africa and India, Central and South America, all throughout the United States with tribes. But as I mentioned, in the last 4 or 5 years, I've really just been focusing back home in Alaska. Just a myriad of experiences that have enriched my thinking and my understanding about what's happened around the world. And the piece that I want to share with you today, since I don't really have a lot of time, is understanding the impacts of this era of global colonization and assimilation. This idea that based on a spiritual or religious superiority or a racial superiority, that it was okay to dominate other cultures and to strip them of who they were. For our people, it was a stripping of our language, our songs, our dance, our culture, our spirituality. It's actually just, believe it or not, in the last year that some of our villages in Alaska have even accepted the drumming and singing back into their communities because of the lingering impacts of those early missionaries who basically told us that who we were was wrong. And that's a piece of what's tied into the issue that we're having right now with suicide among our people. When I listened yesterday to Amina and Arn speak, what I saw was a reflection of the same issue that my own people are facing. All around the world we've been impacted by colonization and assimilation practices and by the underlying thinking and beliefs that enable them to continue to be perpetrated around the world. And all of us are suffering for it, but I think that some of us aren't aware that we're suffering. Wow, so little time, so much to say. So the work that I've been doing has been focused on utilizing, reconnecting with our land, with our language, with our culture, with our way of life as Native people, and our values to reach our younger people. So we take them way out on the land. This last group, we were brought out and dropped off, no motorized vehicles. We had to harvest fresh water off the frozen ocean. One young man with good eyes spotted some caribou inland, and we hiked up around 5 miles and got the caribou and packed it back to our camp and made traditional meat drying racks and hung our meat and dried it. And in the midst of that, some of these young people who've gone through more suffering and trauma than most of us probably go through in our entire life were able to finally begin to open up to somebody who was loving and caring and willing to sit there and listen to them and not judge them for who they are. It's about the creation, basically, of spaces that are safe for us to be able to share our stories and not feel bad about either the wounds that we received or the perpetrations that we carried out upon others, because both of those result in suffering inside. So if there's any message, really, I guess, that I have for you today is that we need the healers like Arn and Amina within every one of our communities, because it's only from within the context of the worldview and our experiences that we're really able to understand and reach the people that we're trying to support. And so if you're one of those healers, I encourage you to embrace your path and your role in this life. Have the courage to face the storm that's coming, because I think that things are going to become challenging, and we need to be very grounded and very clear about who we are on our path and how it is that we can really honor and help one another. We also need advocates from within our communities. One piece is that I went so far down my own path of healing, and then I realized that why is it that I'm still waking up every morning even though I feel like I'm a pretty healthy person, and I feel uneasiness within me? And I began to connect the dots of the bigger picture that, as Alaska Native people, we're still not equals in our own land. We're one of the only indigenous peoples that our traditional hunting and fishing rights as Native people has been extinguished by the federal government back in 1971. I was just speaking at a rally actually last week on the streets of Anchorage on this issue, and the National Congress of American Indians just 2 days ago passed a resolution requesting Congress to restore our indigenous hunting and fishing rights as Native people. And that's some of the lingering impacts of the colonial days, the idea that if you come in and you strip a people of their right to be able to live their way of life, you can manifest control over them. And trust me, as a Native person, it doesn't feel good to have a state trooper or a police come up to you and cut your fishing net when you're just trying to feed your family out on the land. And so the healing has to also incorporate challenging injustice in the world. We can't allow the perpetuation of injustices to occur. We have to challenge them where we see them. There's a deep healing that's needed in this country between the indigenous and the non-indigenous communities. because our people still aren't sitting across the table with this federal government as equals. Alaska Natives, in fact, have never even had a treaty settlement with the United States. And so there's so much that needs to be done, and it's that balancing, I think, of that healing and the self-determination. You know, and it's not about standing here and being angry or frustrated with somebody, but just telling it like it is, and being able to stand up with the truth and work towards changing. So I'm just going to conclude by saying thank you so much for being here, for inviting me to share a few of my thoughts and reflections with you. And I wish you all very well in your life. And, you know, I brought my drum. You guys want to hear a traditional song? One of the things that Chief David Salmon told me was, before he passed on, he said, "From now on, you travel everywhere with your drum." I forgot it one trip, but most of the time I remember it. So this song is called